following program on Other Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations.
Tonight, we discuss the current context of environmental law and the protection of the environment in Sri Lanka. Have there been significant advances to the legislature in these aspects? How can the law evolve to better accommodate the protection of our environment? A very good evening, and you're joining us on yet another episode of Law, Land and Liberty, where we break down key legal issues and concepts for the layman. Now, today's topic is something that I'm sure not many of us are unfamiliar with, of course. It's something that surrounds us on the daily, and that is on environmental law. Now, sure, protecting and conserving the environment is something that we've been taught since our young age. It's part of our ethics and our values. But are we really putting enough power behind our words? Are we putting action to our commitment in our heads? Well, to speak about this specific issue, specifically in the current context, we have someone that I believe is one of the best suited individuals to speak about this topic, and that is Mr. Attorney at Law Vishwa De Livera Tennekoon. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us and our audience today. Just a small introduction on Mr. Tennekoon. He has a practice in both civil and criminal disciplines in Hulstorf, ranging from the magistrates courts all the way to the Supreme Court, as well as being an environmental law lecturer at the Sri Lanka Law College as well. And just another interesting side note, he's also the chairman of the Environment Committee of the BASL 2022-2023. So safe to say we're in good hands when it comes to this topic, specifically with Mr. Tennekoon. Well, before we get into any of the discussion tonight, here's a small breakdown on how we're going to approach this topic. So first off, we'll be giving you a little bit of an introduction to the current environmental law and the current situation as we see it in Sri Lanka. Next, we'll have an overview of the key issues and the catastrophic destruction that we've seen in the recent years when it comes to the environment and the law specifically. Finally, we'll be going in for the judicial frameworks and the current legal frameworks that are in existence, and also some judicial decisions and the solutions for the future.
Hi, I'm Sahasra. I'm an undergraduate, and my question is on the history of environmental law. How has the legislature surrounding the protection of environments evolved over the years?
All right, well, without any further ado, let's get right into this extremely packed discussion. Now, sir, thank you once again. It's a very ambitious topic to tackle in just a few minutes of our time. There's a lot more to discuss. But why don't we start off right here without any necessary preambles? Could you tell us a little bit about the current context and also the historical significance when it comes to environment in Sri Lanka? Could you tell us a little bit?
Thanks a lot, Anuradhi, for having me on the show. And it's actually quite a timely topic, and I will explain to you and elaborate on why it's quite significant in today's context. And well, in terms of Sri Lanka's geographical significance, I'm sure a lot of people know that we are in a very strategic maritime position, and we have been visited from persons from far away countries since a long time ago. And in fact, because of our strategic location, some theologians believe that even on in the Bible that there is a reference to Sri Lanka, and it says that King Solomon may have sent ships to Sri Lanka and got back apes, peacocks, and also ivory. So there was trade of our natural resources, apparently, or it could be that such trade was happening from even during the time of the Bible, or even epics like such as the Ramayana mentions Sri Lanka. And even if you go back, so from the time of known history, Sri Lanka has been known to be in a significant location, and as well as also known for being rich. When I say rich, I mean with natural resources. And as far as recently as 1956, we have had the former Prime Minister of Singapore commenting that Sri Lanka has better resources than Singapore, and certainly it had at that time we were far better placed than Singapore. But today's context is quite different, and in fact, I think what we need now is a change of mindset, for the reason that people need to understand that our money or the wealth wealth or our currency is not the pecuniary or the monetary, is not in that sense, but it's the natural resources, it's the biodiversity, and it is the land mass that is of great value, immeasurable value. And apart from the historical significance, and also moving in, apart from the picturesque hills and the beaches that a lot of people come to visit and that we all tend to appreciate, we also have Singaraja, the reserve, which is one of its it's the last viable area of primary tropical forest in Sri Lanka, and about also home to about 50% of the endemic plants and species of Sri Lanka. So this being a biodiversity hotspot, Anuradhi, it's pretty impressive to understand that from say even 2019, about 2020, 37 new species were discovered. In 2020, about another 50 species were discovered, so on and so forth. So the discovery of new species is a continuous process that keeps happening. So I think the more you look, the more you're going to find. That's how much of a biodiversity hotspot Sri Lanka is. And I can give you lots of examples. Even the fact that new primates have been discovered in Sri Lanka as very recently as 2020 or 2021. So the concept of environmental harm is not limited to the national context. It actually moves from the national context, and we look at environmental harm or causing the contributors to environmental harm as being transboundary in nature. So just because we are an island doesn't mean that we are safe. We have so many factors that could degrade our environment, and it is happening. And if you look at environmental law as a whole, as a quick introduction, I think a good starting point would be the Trail Smelter case from 1941, which is also referred to as the US versus Canada case, in which is the first of its kind, where we discussed how to tackle transboundary harm and also transboundary issues focused on environmental concerns. And I believe, as much as I have spoken about the fact that we are living on an island which is wealthy in terms of its natural resources, may I also say that as confirmed, I mean this is a general understanding, but there was a first global report from the United Nations Environmental Programme, and in that it speaks about environmental rule of law, and it says that the natural resources should not be treated as not just national property, but global assets. So what we're talking about now is something that actually concerns the globe, rather than looking at it just in terms of the Sri Lankan context. And in terms of what we are discussing today, I think we are discussing not just protecting the rights of future generations of Sri Lankans, but future generations in total in terms of the global, in terms of a global perspective. So I'd like to also touch on, moving on to the present concerns that Sri Lanka is facing, that the globe is facing. It's really important to also understand that human beings have always been destructive in nature. That's simply, we've been creative and destructive. Sometimes you say that it goes hand in hand. But now we have become the beast we feared the most back in the Dark Ages. And I wouldn't say that it was reasonable, but or that you can, well, at least you can probably understand why big mammals and big creatures and scary creatures were killed and destroyed, and there was a requirement or a need to attack the beasts of the jungle long years ago. It's Harari's book, Homo Sapiens, it speaks about the history of humanity. Interestingly, it sets out that even even in Australia, there have been mega fauna, like big creatures, huge creatures, from giant koalas to giant kangaroos, that he speculates could have all died down 70,000 years ago because of human intervention, or at least the introduction of humans onto that continent. So we have been responsible for the destruction of biodiversity throughout history, but what's different now is that we know better, and those concerns for our safety as an individual, maybe to the family unit, is no longer relevant, because we are, as I told you, the big beast, so to say, and I believe it's safe to say that we have climbed right up to the apex of the food chain in today's context.
Right.
So having said that, if we were to look at Sri Lanka's context, the understanding is that at the turn of the last century, that's in the 1900s, we had about 70% forest cover. And during the time that, during the British colonial rule, there had been somewhat about 85% forest cover. This is a really significant number if you think about it, because 85% of our land mass was covered with forests. Now, when the British left us in the 1900s, there had apparently been about 70% forest cover. In today's context, we can't even give a clear number, because depending on the definition of what you would use to, or your definition of forests, the number varies. So some low estimates say that we have about 16% forest cover. Some would, that is a drastic decrease. So it would then also maybe kind of go on to somewhere about 25. Some are hopeful that it's still at about 30, but I don't think we have the luxury of trying to being hopeful. We need to know certainly how much of a forest cover we have, because if you really think about it, that number is significant. Why? Because now let's go on the basis that we have 35%, just for ease of calculation. That means that in the 1900s, or when we started off, we had about 70% forest cover, and from there we have halved our forests. Right, but where have we come? What has happened to us? How far have we come in terms of economy? Have we developed? Have we used those forest resources?
Utilization.
We haven't, right? You know what sort of a context that we're speaking in today in terms of the economic collapse, in terms of mismanagement. So if factually our government, our rulers can mismanage an economy, let's not even, I mean, we are on red alert. So this is the time to act, and it's time to act fast.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you short there, because we've come to the end of this specific segment. There's a lot for us to touch on, especially considering the current context and the alarming statistics that you just brought up to us. I'm pretty sure our audience was not completely aware of just how drastic it was, the erosion of our forests and the complete destruction of our already existing wealth in the environment. But before we go into any of those discussions, let's take a very short commercial break. You're watching Lawland Unlimited. Stay with us.
Hi, my name is Vishwa De Livera Tennekoon and I'm an engineering student. My question is on current issues. Does the law address the destruction of Sri Lanka's ecology?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in discussion with attorney at law Vishwa De Livera Tennekoon. Now, sir, we just left off on what was our introductory segment. We were, well, a little bit of bombshell information for people that were not probably keeping up with environmental statistics in the current context, considering the economic duress that we're under as well. But what you just left off on was a key piece of information that I'm sure not a lot of us have really looked into. So could you please delve a little bit deeper on that in relation to an overview of the current issues that we have in Sri Lanka?
Absolutely, Anuradha. I think that's exactly why this is a timely discussion, because there is that economic crunch, and unknowns to maybe a lot of people, sometimes they might be eating into the most precious asset that Sri Lanka and Sri Lankans have, and with bad planning we would not be left with anything, and the future remains quite dark for generations yet unborn. And you see, I did speak about forest deforestation and destruction of the forests. This is another big concern, not having a proper number for how much of forests we have, but then moving into why it's happening and the reason for deforestation. There are many factors that move into it. Sometimes they are as simple, or well, as well, it's actually to do with a misunderstanding of a particular order or a circular, and then you have people giving out forest land for development projects which has not necessarily been approved. Sometimes there's corruption involved. There's all sorts of situations that actually lead to this aspect of the country's wealth being destroyed. Right. So I think very recently, just in October, there was a incident of reported in the papers about local firms get forest lands in controversial deals. And when we're talking about lands, they're talking about 25,000 acres. We're talking about 7,000 acres of forest. And when you say forest, they are simply going to destroy. And that also links with, and that's the nature of environmental issues. They're all interlinked, and it finally gets linked back to you. The very fact is you give out these forests and you can't necessarily regrow them. There is a concept called reforestation, but this is not the heritage that we need to protect. Yes, humans can also replant, but we need to hold on to the heritage which has been preserved since the ancient times. So, in terms of the concerns or the drivers of deforestation, encroachment is certainly one of the biggest issues that you would find all in and around the island. You also find poorly planned infrastructure development projects, or even large-scale development projects which are not concerned about the environment. Because sometimes it's like this, Anuradhi. I think that's the thing. We need to change how we approach this, because I believe there was a time when the general public, sometimes you would see a lot of people when they're going in their vehicles, they would throw whatever garbage that they have in the vehicle, they would throw it out, because as long as the inside of the vehicle was kept clean, then outside no one really cares. But you see how far we've come. Today you go to the beaches, you see what the fish have caught. Certainly, whether they catch fish or not, I will guarantee that they will catch plastic, right? So that's how bad it is. So having said that, you also find large-scale agricultural ventures that tend to cause a lot of deforestation. Agriculture is one of the biggest factors for pollution and also environmental degradation. Then we do have urbanization, illegal lodging, infrastructure development, so on and so forth. And funnily enough, the last I checked, I did look into the address also. The Forest Conservation Department is housed in the Timber Corporation building, or they're right next door to each other. So whether that's effective or not in today's context you need to always look at these things, whether you're going to look at conservation and timber, or whether they can be kept in close proximity or not. Sorry to say this, but even religious institutions are responsible for some of the deforestation issues that Sri Lanka is facing. Because you find churches and sometimes monasteries in reserves that tend to grow in popularity, and as much as they grow in popularity, then the destruction happens, and then the forest becomes secondary, and the religious establishment tends to take a primary role. Sometimes Sri Lanka, you find people who want to go and meditate. So it's understandable that you want to go and find a place far off in the jungle to find a quiet place to sit and meditate. So when they first move there, they usually go with nothing, and then people sometimes find out that there's someone there, and then people come and visit them in the jungle. So little by little, the cave turns out to be a bit of a construction, and little by little you have this, and the next thing you know, there's a road coming up, and then you have a shrine, and then you have this sort of a temple. But I think enough is enough. We have enough and more temples. The change has to happen from within, and also a change of mindset and conservation has to be inculcated in our minds, strong enough to pass on to future generations. Talking about the destruction of biodiversity, we are a biodiversity hotspot. We have a range of species and subspecies that call Sri Lanka home, right? So there is a rampant destruction of biodiversity in Sri Lanka. A good example is the killing or the slaying of elephants, which there's a staggering number, right? If you really think about it. There's, on average, at least one elephant that is being killed per day in this country. Right, so apparently some estimates say that we have about 6,000 elephants in the country. But think about the fact that one elephant a day is being killed for whatever reason, right? It's human reason. I mean, I will get to some of the numbers, but it's all due to, or most probably due to, human concerns, human activities. Even if it is diseases, some would attribute, they said this amount of elephants have died because of disease, but how did they become ill? How did they, you find elephants eating out of garbage, and these are horrible, these are horrific, right? Images that are being shared around of elephants eating garbage, and we are not doing anything to stop any of this harm. And these are majestic creatures. I wonder whether you've seen the Jungle Book. The protagonist there, while walking in the jungle, sees the elephants, and they respectfully bow down to the elephants because they are the ones who create the jungle. They are the ones who
cornerstone of the ecosystem.
Pretty much, right? And they're sentient beings. You know that for a fact. We know that there are famous stories about even even in the Kandy temple, when the relic, the sacred tooth relic was being carried, the elephant had suddenly realized that a strap had come off, and it had stopped in its tracks waiting for someone to secure this. That's how they know humans. We can get along, but we're not even trying. We're not even giving them a chance. That's a really serious concern. Leopards, right? So the amount of leopards that are being killed, up to 2022, within 10 years, 102 wild leopards have been killed, usually by snares, but 102 leopards in a context where we probably have about less than 1,000, 700 to 950 leopards, is seriously alarming. We could wipe out our entire population if we do not do something proactive about this within the next 5 years. So then it'll just be like they say, legend would say that Sri Lanka had lions. Probably some long years from now they would say we probably had leopards, and they'll talk about a myth of a black leopard, who, we all know what happened to the black leopard that was found a few years ago. Although we may not be concerned, or we don't see that this is currency that's running around, this is currency that is being looted, there are foreign nationals who see the value of all this currency. So Sri Lanka is becoming a hub for smuggling tortoise. It's becoming a hub for supplying the shark fin industry. So recently there was a haul of about 250 kilograms of dried shark fins. So 250, only the fin, not the rest of the fish. So that's about 250 to 300 sharks that would have probably been killed for those fins. So all those animals end up being killed, and there is that destruction of biodiversity. The human-elephant conflict is something that is of serious concern. As I did tell you, the jaw bombs or the hakkapatas is something that a lot of elephants they end up dying, losing their lives for. And poaching, habitat loss, all those things are things that actually cause the loss of all these lives. And if you really think about it, humans can live vertically, we can do agriculture vertically, but how are we going to house all these elephants vertically? They need the forest more than us now. We need to understand that, and we need to facilitate their existence, and we need to coexist with these magnificent beasts, magnificent creatures. So moving in, again, I don't want to stress on how bad the elephant situation is. We already know. The purple-faced leaf monkey. Again, the endemic to Sri Lanka, critically endangered, especially the nestor from the western province. So we had four types of the, we have four types of the purple-faced leaf monkey in the southern, western, dry zone, and the highlands. The western purple-faced leaf monkey is critically endangered. Why is it? Because of the reason that we have fragmented forests in and around the in the western province. And another good reason is, you see, these animals don't quite understand urbanization. They don't understand all these developments that are kind of going on within the island. So they're tree dwellers. So some of these creatures, their loss of habitat is gone. But if they need to move from one forest to another within the western province, what happens is that they move into, they use the electricity lines, and if the electricity lines are not properly insulated, they get electrocuted and they die. So it's horrible, their existence. These sentient beings are living in hell. Unfortunately for them, this hell is within this paradise island, but we can
doing as well.
Pretty much.
Well, there's a lot, especially when it comes to the egregious violations that have been made towards the certain species in the nation, as well as pollution overall as well, we need to discuss. But unfortunately, the time has come. We've come to time for this specific segment. We have a lot more to discuss when it comes to the current context and the violations that have been made towards these species and towards our environment, our soil, our water, our air. Well, before we speak about any of those, let's take a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. Stay with us.
I'm an ecology student. My question is on President. Has the judiciary set out enough case law for the protection of the environment?
Welcome back. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty, and we're in discussion with Attorney at Law Vishwa De Livera Tennekoon. So we just ended a very momentous segment in basically enlightening our viewers into just how egregious the violations are towards our species. But we didn't quite get to touch on, unfortunately, time is running short. But could you please quickly explain to us the pollution aspect as well, because I feel like that would more certainly acknowledge us and of course concern us as a species.
Certainly, I think you said it quite well, because pollution is something that directly concerns us, and this is something that is causing a lot of health issues amongst our people, the people of this nation. And pollution in general, you could find soil pollution, water pollution and air pollution. I'll get to air pollution just in a bit, because there are some fascinating index and indicators that anyone can actually look into. Soil pollution is happening all around. People have tend to bury so many things on the soil for the longest time, and even concerns like e-waste is now becoming a problem. Again, industrial activities, mining activities, manufacturing, domestic livestock and municipal waste, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, all of that is causing soil pollution, which in turn is polluting our own bodies. We have water pollution, which is apparent, it's evident, it's all over. You see that, you don't need to look too far. Another what I want you to understand is that even having, say, over 2,500 poultry is considered medium polluting industry. So you have, situations like you are meant to get an EPL, like an environmental protection license, to be engaged in those activities. Then we are looking at air quality. Now, air quality is something that is of great significance, especially because of the airborne viruses that have been, and the prevalent pandemic that we have just, passed on. But there is there's a NBRO also has a site which you can go to and check the air quality on a regular basis. Like you're checking the weather, I would suggest we are going to a time where we have to check the air quality on a regular basis. Sri Lanka was actually at a moderate air quality level on average, but we've had some bad days for the whole of 2022. But we are now experiencing a phenomenon towards December. Air quality goes as bad as some of the worst countries with the worst quality of air. That's in fact pregnant ladies, people with heart conditions shouldn't go out in air out in Colombo without wearing a mask, because that could cause a lot of serious concerns. Again, this is not the dark, the dark gloom and doom situation. Yes, all of this has happened, but we can take corrective steps. We still have time. We need to get proactively involved. And from the trail smelter case that I spoke to you about from the 1940s, we've come a long way in terms of the jurisprudence that is contained in some of the international treaties, the conventions and the declarations, and we have principles of international law that we can rely on. Coming from the Stockholm Declaration and the Rio Declaration and all the other jurisprudence, as I told you. Principle of sustainable development is one of the key concepts of environmental law. The precautionary principle, again, is something of importance, but for today's context, I think the intergenerational equity principle is of great significance, and also polluter pays principle is something that has been discussed and that we can use. But I want to touch, because of the fact that we don't have too much time, touch on the public trust doctrine. The public trust doctrine is something that is relevant. I'll tell you why just in a bit. But before getting to that, talking about the future generations, a fascinating and a landmark case that was decided from the Philippines back in 1993 is the case of Oposo factor and case that was filed on behalf of generations yet unborn. So a bunch of miners filed the case and they won the case. It was timber. There was indiscriminately they were giving out timber licenses. So what effectively happened was that court said, no, you need to preserve these natural resources for future generations from there. So we, in 1996, we have also a significant case, a Pavla case, in which Justice Amar Singh has basically explained and gone into these concepts of environmental principles. Again, a very, very important judicial decision which ensured that the natural resources of people were not depleted in one go, and it's something in which the public trust doctrine was discussed at length, and certainly, then thereafter, a case reported in 2009, 1 SLR 337, Vijay Banda versus Conservator General of Forest, Justice Tilakavardhana, has also discussed the doctrine of public trust. And if I may quote a portion which I think is extremely necessary for our people to understand, and what they say is, governments make policy decisions related to the environment and its useful utilization, conservation and protection, and should always be only in the interests of the general public, with a long-term view of such being conserved for intergenerational use. For this doctrine is closely linked with the principle of intergenerational equity. Humankind of one generation holds the guardianship and conservation of the natural resources in trust for future generations, a sacred duty to be carried out with the highest level of accountability. So we have the law, we have these judicial findings that we can rely on. So we already have the context, we have the ammunition needed to protect our natural resources. And also moving into another case, a recent case, Justice Prasanna Jayawardena in the Chunakam power station case had also, he goes on to say that in light, agreeing with Justice Tilakavardhana in the previous case that I mentioned, that it vests in the citizens of Sri Lanka a fundamental right to be free from unlawful, arbitrary and unreasonable executive or administrative acts or omissions which cause or permit the causing of pollution or degradation of the environment. So this is already there. In terms of a very recent matter that is currently before court, there is SCFR 1 of 2021, which deals with a cabinet decision to give Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation lands to divisional secretaries. That has been, there have been a leave to proceed was granted in that. It's a matter before court. So in that sense, you see the judicial activity, the judiciary is protecting the rights of the people where the executive has failed.
So that means there is proactive actions.
Most certainly, but this is where we need to get the people now. A quick understanding or a quick mention of the animal welfare bill, right? It has been discussed and discussed. That's, I mean, you see so many acts and bills being passed. I think this is the slowest act to move through the halls of Parliament. Nothing has happened then thereafter. After, I think it came about in January or so, after the situation that happened last year, no one's discussing that, you know. But then in terms of everything else, we value and respect all other animals, but what about a bill to ensure that it doesn't happen? You know, still the parliamentarians or the people's representatives are sleeping, where you see that the judiciary is quite active in contrast to some of the government representatives. As I was saying, the SCFR 1 of 2021 is an important case which is currently going through the court, the Superior Court. And it's again where, you know, although I explained to you how bad our, you know, forest, the situation is in terms of our forests, I did, the government is still okay to give control over these forest land, even to the divisional secretariats, the secretaries, and it is irresponsible at this stage, once you understand how much of a natural resource we have, how much we have now. and where things are going in the future. So apart from the broader context of the environmental law principles and apart from the judicial wisdom, we have a lot of national laws that I don't think I can go into at the moment, but all of that is available. I believe you have also done a discussion on that some time ago, which is comprehensive. But then again, we have local laws such as public nuisance, which is found in the Criminal Procedure Code, which could also arrest some of these nuisances that you find on a very local level. So we have the judicial wisdom, we have the legislative framework, but in my humble opinion, I don't think it's enough. We need to move into innovative ways to tackle some of these issues, because once the destruction happens, there is no question of going back. It's about, the fact is, once it's done, it's done.
Right, so we have to be proactively thinking about the future as well.
Absolutely.
I feel like that would be a perfectly good segue for us to go into our final segment as well, because
Absolutely.
we have discussed quite the key legislatures and judicial evidence that we've seen that there is some form of protection awarded to the people in relation to the conservation of the environment, and the conservation of the environment thereby leading to the conservation of the people of the future. Well, before we go into any of the specifics about the protection of future generations, let's go in for a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. Stay with us.
Hello, my name is Vishwa De Livera and I am an international relations student. My question is on future protection. Does Sri Lanka's laws adequately address the conservation of environment for upcoming generations?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in our final segment. We're in discussion with attorney at law Vishwa De Livera Tennekoon. We just finished quite possibly one of the most important discussions we've had so far in relation to this topic in the history of our programming, where we spoke about how it's not just that we don't have any judicial protection or legislative protection. There is, it's just not being proactively made, strengthened and being sought after and being conserved actively by the people of this country. So, sir, could you please go into possibly the most interesting segment that we can speak about for this discussion, which is the protection of future generations. Could you please explain to us how exactly we can go about in doing something that sounds very arbitrary, sounds very meta?
Well, I mean, all of these natural resources, everything that we've spoken about, the biodiversity, the forests, they are for the future generation. I mean, locally, you find parents doing enough for their children, but as a community, are we doing enough for our future communities? That's what we need to figure out. We are not living in isolation anymore. We are one big society. We need to understand that we've come a long way from being tribal to being national, and now we're talking about a global perspective. Recently, the budget proposal was discussed, and well, I mean, from the numbers that I see, just 0.4% has been allocated for forest, environmental forest conservation and wildlife. Is that enough? I will let you decide. Agriculture, about 25 billion, and now environmental forest conservation, wildlife, 10 billion, right? Which, I mean, is that enough to protect your most valuable resource? I don't know. So then you have to ask your parliamentarians, your representatives. They are the ones who you need to activate, you need to lobby with, they need to make sure that they pass laws. They've been passing a lot of laws recently, and I truly appreciate the fact that they are being quite proactive about it. But what about to preserve our natural resources? What about to protect the biodiversity? We need to act fast. We need to come up with elephant corridors. Now, elephants are being killed. They're being hit by trains on a regular basis. 6-7 elephants die. Families of elephants die because they get hit by trains. Let's think something novel. Ultrasound or low sound frequencies attached to trains when they're coming, so that the elephant is alerted to the fact that there's something coming towards them. Something new. We don't need to be thinking within the box, because we need to be novel. Remember, from the time of the Old Testament, even far back into the epics, far before the record of history of time, Sri Lanka has existed, and we can bring about an example to the rest of the people. And we have done so in environmental law. I can't even start to go into Justice Veeramantri's contributions to environmental law, because he's been a proactive judge in terms of giving some good determinations in the International Court of Justice. We live in a finite world. even things like classic cars, mini miners, mini miners, old crocs, they weren't valuable long years ago, but today they're very expensive, right? Now, similarly, at some point in time, we will understand that the true and the only asset that Sri Lanka ever had are its natural assets, and we need to now take every possible step to protect our natural resources. Now, also, in New Zealand, they have also, in 2017, they came up with a very interesting concept. They gave the title of personhood to a river, right? So the river became a person. It can go, it can sue and be sued like a company. Those are interesting approaches. Sustainable development has to give due regard to the importance of the environment. Constitutional changes also need to be brought into the picture. And I am a proponent and I advocate that at least we need to have entrenched clauses in the constitution that says that and ensures that at least 40% of the Sri Lankan forests are preserved for future generations. This is nothing new. Bhutan has a clause in the constitution that says at least 60% of its forest reserve will be preserved for the future. We have countries like Ecuador that again looks into these constitutional safeguards, because the constitution is for the people, and the forests, the biodiversity, all of that is also for the people. The framers of the 1972-1978 constitution, it was a different time, long years ago. Maybe they never thought it was important, because in Sri Lanka, if you really think about it, we really don't have too much. We have a directive principle of state policy, if I can quickly read it, and it says that the state is pledged to establish in Sri Lanka a democratic socialist society, the objectives of which shall be. So they have to establish that society. One of the objectives is that the state shall protect, preserve and improve the environment for the benefit of the community. Now this is what Article 27(2)(14) says. There's also fundamental duty to protect nature and conserve its heritage. That falls on to everyone. But Article 29 says that the provisions of this chapter do not confer or impose legal rights or obligations and are not enforceable in any court or tribunal. So it's you direct state policy through that to protect the environment, but nothing to say there is a must. But the time is now. We need to protect our resources. We need to demarcate, and the rulers, the people who can think about these things, you have to be able to think about it, because finally you can't put it down to the person who's hungry. He's going to go into the jungle and find something. He's going to cut a tree, sell it. He's going to find some species, sell it off to someone else and find some money. No. So then, understanding those concerns, the people who are in a position of power, who are responsible for doing so, ought to plan ahead. And this is always the case. There are a number of countries who, as I said, have enshrined environmental protection into their constitution. And the fact is this, right? We live in a viral age, right? And in this viral age, we have certain concerns that need to be addressed. Now, say, for example, a few days ago, for some long holiday, the Nine-Arc Bridge, there was a massive crowd of people who had just gone there, almost, they've all just gone there. But you must understand, since the British time, that Nine-Arc Bridge was there. Where were the people then? So these trends are there. If environmental destructive trends come into the picture, we could lose everything that we have overnight. And this sometimes happens. You watched Finding Nemo, the cartoon. Yeah. Once that cartoon became popular, clownfish in so many different rivers, so many different water bodies, they've disappeared because they've been caught and sold. So these trends are quite dangerous and deadly. So I strongly believe, like so many countries, such as India, France, Norway, Kenya, Bolivia, Costa Rica, Brazil, South Africa, we also need to move in to have an entrenched clause in our constitution that protects our natural wealth.
Right. Well, there is quite a lot that we can do, but not much that we're seeing in the current context as well. So do you have any message for anyone that's watching our audience in order to personally, proactively help with the legislative, well, not just the legislative aspects, but what can we do? How can we hold ourselves accountable?
Well, just understand that whatever happens, the judiciary is there for the people, and understand that if you have a strong enough case, that the judiciary will protect your rights. Article 12(1) is on equality and the equal protection of the law. And there is enough judicial wisdom that says that even the environment is encapsulated within the 12(1) protection. So you have something come under 14A, under the right to information. Go and find out what's going on in your locality. Get the information, come to court, let's fight it. Right? Let's fight it and preserve our natural resources for the people. The duty is on you, the duty is on I, and I believe that if we proactively get involved, that we can do a lot for the future generations.
Right. Well, we have a little bit more time left. I believe it's important for us, before we conclude this discussion, could you please give us a little bit of a conclusory remark when it comes to the constitutional aspect as well? Do you believe, in your opinion, these kinds of actions will be taken forward in the future? Do you believe that we have hope when it comes to our judiciary and our legislative system?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Now, quite recently, I believe 16th of November, if I'm not too mistaken, there was a case that was ICFR 195 2020, in which it was where certain individuals were named as being responsible for the financial collapse. Think about this. We never thought that we would ever go bankrupt, but we went there. We never thought Sri Lankans would ever go hungry, but we are there now. We are there. I saw the other day that there are 500,000 people in the dark. This is the 2023, there are people in the dark still in Sri Lanka. Because of what? Because of bad rulers. So all of this needs to change, and it will change, it ought to change. And the interesting thing about that case, 195, CFR 195, is that in that they have discussed a lot of environmental law cases and the public trust doctrine, and they have found that people have effectively destroyed the monetary aspect. But very soon, if we don't do this, and this comes as a dire warning, if we do not take protective steps, I think we may end up also, why trouble the judiciary to write another great judgment, but against the destruction of our forest reserves, naming other people responsible? Let's not go there. Right? Let's not go there. Let's get proactively involved with the process. You have the processes. There are enough and more organizations, environmental organizations.
Exist.
It's there, right? So, but we need to know what's going on, and it's an ongoing fight, and it's something that if we take steps, already a lot of steps have taken. I don't think I'll have time enough to explain all the amazing steps that have been taken by some amazing individuals, but certainly, if we do take the corrective steps, and in terms of the constitution, let's ask the people to ask their representative about this, about the 40% entrenched clause. At least, let's say, in the constitution, we'll start from there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a hopeful message for us to leave off our discussion in as well. While there is a lot more to discuss, unfortunately, time has come against us. Once again, thank you very much, sir, for taking the time to enlighten our audience. I believe we took back a lot from this discussion today, including myself, in relation to the protection of our environment and thereby our future. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Anuradhi, for having me on board. Thank you.
All right. Well, while it is not something that we can see immediate results on, the protection of our environment is one of the most significant investments that can be made for the survival of the human race. Let's stay keen on maintaining sustainability for a better future. We leave you tonight with the words of Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. The one who plants trees knowing that he will never sit in their shade has at least started to understand the meaning of life. That is all we have for you on Law, Land and Liberty. If you had missed any of today's programs, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/otherderana English. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.